Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Peter Nelson, and I'm an internist for Kettering Health Network, and today we're going to talk all about sugar. We're always told that sugar is a really bad thing, so let's learn some details about sugar and how it might be hurting us. Before we start talking about sugar, let's first look at obesity in America. For about 100 years prior to 1970, obesity was about 10 to 15% in the population, and right at around 1970, 1975, we start to see this real uptick in obesity amongst men and women. This happened no matter which state you were in and was happening universally. And a lot of people have asked the question, what changed at this moment of time that's really driven the weight change? And you might have heard, oh, it's our lack of willpower, we don't exercise as much. And while those things might contribute, the real thought is that it's the added sugar in our food. How did we get here? So in the mid-1970s, there was this war on fat. Fat was really bad. Now, if you're a food company and you make food and you're getting told that fat is really bad and you have to take fat out of it, well, food doesn't taste as good anymore. So what do we replace the fat with? We replace it with salt, but really a lot of sugar. So sugar gets added to all the food. Well, sugar gets really expensive, and we in America don't have a lot of places we can grow sugar. So what can we grow instead? We can grow corn. We can grow corn very cheaply. So we create an alternative called high fructose corn syrup. And high fructose corn syrup gets added to everything. This now allows companies to make food very, very cheap. So we create industrialized food. And this, in turn, over the last 50 years, has created what we call the standard American diet. And the standard American diet leads to foods that are too sugary, very processed, which ultimately ends up leading to large meals that we can buy for very cheap. So what are we actually talking about when we talk about sugar? When we talk about blood sugar, we're talking about the chemical called glucose. But there's lots of other sugars in the world, both in our food and in our bodies. The other sugar that I'm going to talk about today is fructose. I'm about to make a case that it's potentially all the added fructose in our diet that is actually driving the obesity in America. Now, when you look at nutrition labels, you don't actually see the words glucose or fructose, you see the words sugar. And sugar, as we think about it, that white crystally stuff on your table, is actually sucrose. And sucrose is a glucose and a fructose stuck together, so it's half glucose, half fructose. Well, remember in the 1970s and 80s, we created high fructose corn syrup. But high fructose corn syrup is essentially the same thing. It's a glucose and a fructose stuck together. And so you can kind of assume anytime you see sugar or high fructose corn syrup on your nutrition labels, it's half glucose, it's half fructose. And unfortunately, the words sugar and high fructose corn syrup aren't the only things on the nutrition labels. Companies use more than 50 names for sugar on nutrition labels, so it can be very confusing. So this is my very rudimentary clip art anatomy of your body. And we're going to talk about what happens when we eat foods that have sugar in them. So in this picture, you can see our stomach, where our food goes first. We start breaking down the food, and that goes into our intestines. We absorb the nutrients from our food, and that goes through our portal vein to our liver. And our liver deals with all the building blocks which get used around our body. So let's first talk about maybe something healthy, like an orange. Well, an orange has sugar, so why is the sugar in an orange not that bad? Well, when we eat the orange comes down into our stomach, and we break it into little glucoses and fructoses. The fact that the orange still has all its structure, all the skin, all the cells, means it takes a long time to actually get the glucose and the fructose out of it. So it's kind of this very slow release. So only a small amount of glucose and fructose gets shown to our body at a time. As that moves into our intestines, our body actually has mechanisms to turn the fructose into glucose. Glucose then gets absorbed, and that gets taken to the liver. And glucose is really an important thing. We always think of glucose as a bad thing, but glucose really is the thing we burn for fuel. Our muscles use it, our heart uses it, our brain uses it. We burn it for energy, it keeps us warm, it allows us to move. When enough glucose hits the brain, ultimately it tells the brain, stop eating, you're full. And that's what we want with our food. Now to counteract against the orange, let's take something that's essentially pure sugar, which is soda. When you get soda, Instead of all the little pockets of fiber trying to get the orange juice out, there is no fiber. So you just get a big load of glucose and fructose into your stomach, nothing holding on to it at all. Now, as the glucose and fructose moves into the intestines, it overwhelms the intestines, and now you no longer have the ability to turn all the fructoses into glucose. You can change some of them, but now the fructose is going to get absorbed, and that hits the liver. And that's really important because fructose gets used in our body very differently than glucose. Fructose isn't really used by our brain, it's not used by our hearts, it's not used by our muscles. Fructose, when it hits the liver, is a signaling molecule to us to store it. So the fructose actually triggers our body to start storing all of our food as fat. And when it hits the brain, it actually tells us, we're not full, we need to eat more. And you might think and wonder, why would something like fructose hit our brain, tell us to eat more, when that causes us to gain weight? We actually see this in the wild. So the standard American diet, which is high in this processed fructose, is great if you're a bear. They see in the wild bears will gorge themselves on overripe fruit, which is full of fructose. It triggers them to keep eating and eating and eating, which triggers them to store more and more as fat, which is really great if you need to hibernate. So they store fat very quickly in the fall, where they can then go sleep for 4 or 5 months. Well, we don't go sleep for 4 or 5 months. So we continue to eat these foods as if we are about to go hibernate, but we never do. So how much can your liver actually handle in terms of the fructose? On average, about 25 grams of fructose. And again, these aren't on our nutrition labels. You have no idea how much fructose really. But we kind of have an idea because remember, half of sugar is fructose. So the rough rule of thumb is our livers can handle about 50 grams of sugar. And even this is probably too much sugar for us for a healthy diet. If you're thinking, do I eat 50 grams of sugar? The average American eats anywhere between 75 and 100 grams of sugar per day. So most of us are eating way more sugar than what our bodies can even handle. The point of this slide is, look how prevalent all of the sugar is in all of our foods. Some key takeaways. Beverages are dangerous. Look at the soda and look at the Frappuccino. That already is almost your whole daily limit of sugar. The other point is, look at the serving sizes. So in the top right corner, I put some Frosted Flakes, which is about 13 grams of sugar. When I looked at my bowl at home, my bowl could handle about 3 servings of cereal. So if I ate a full bowl of Frosted Flakes, that'd be over 30 grams of sugar. I'm already almost to my 50-gram limit, and I haven't even left breakfast. And you'll see some surprising things. There's bread, there's tomato sauce. Just about everything in the grocery store has sugar added to it. So you've got to be careful. And unfortunately, our bodies can also make fructose. It's not just in the foods that we eat. A high salt diet can cause fructose to increase in our body. Being dehydrated. A high glucose intake. So glucose can be a problem if we eat too much of it. So high processed foods like French fries and potato chips that have a lot of glucose can get converted to fructose inside of our body. Also high uric acid in the diet, which is from high animal protein intake, so processed meats. So how can we avoid eating this thing called sugar when it's ubiquitous in our food? There's some useful rules of thumb. One of them isn't any better than the other. The point is, if one of these can help you make better decisions as you're going around the grocery store, at a friend's house, or going to a restaurant, that is useful. So you might have heard it's best to shop the perimeter of the grocery store. That's where your produce is and things like bread and unprocessed meats are. Don't eat anything your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. My grandparents wouldn't recognize half the foods we eat today. If you need a chemistry degree to read the nutrition facts, it's very processed. Rule number 1 is don't drink anything that has sugar in it. Our coffees, our sodas, our juices, they really are a major trigger in this fructose overload in the liver. And I think my favorite, the more your food looks like the thing when it came off of the farm, the better. And to give an example of what I mean by that is, take an apple. An apple looks just like the thing when it came off the tree, and you can eat it. An apple is much better for us than applesauce, which is basically apples that are blended up. Applesauce is better for us than apple juice, which is the applesauce where the fiber's been taken out of it. And apple juice is much, much better for us than Apple Jacks. Let's take whole grains. So this is whole wheat, and you can find types of whole wheat in the grocery store. where you boil it like rice and you eat it, and it's kind of this nice, chewy, delicious thing. That's unprocessed whole wheat. But most of us don't eat whole wheat like that. A little bit of processing creates whole wheat bread. Some more processing, where we take the outer shell of the wheat and throw it away, creates white flour, where we make white bread. That process of going from whole wheat to white, that gets rid of 90% of the nutrition in wheat. So it's a major step down in nutrition when we go from whole wheat to white bread. And when we go from white bread to deep frying it and adding sugar to it, again, very processed. Unfortunately, there's no tree with donuts on it, so it doesn't look like the thing when it came off of our earth. The goal is really not to be perfect. We live in a world that makes us very, very hard. I drive by 15 fast food restaurants on the way home. When I walk to the grocery store, I'm presented with soda and chips and processed foods. The goal really is, can I take a step each day to reduce some of the processed foods in my diet so I can reduce the sugar and make a dent in our weight, our diabetes, our blood pressure, and our overall health? And thank you. My name's Dr. Peter Nelson, and it's been a pleasure talking with you today.